I was born in Montreal, Pratt Avenue.
Me too. My father was the reference librarian at the JPL, so he had to walk to work.
You're like Yiddish
My
gold.
father was the original
Get
Zammler
outta
for
here.
Montreal.
And I have cousins in Montreal, too. My cousin was a war resister in Vietnam, and he accepted the invitation to go north.
Yeah, and my great-grandfather was a pushcart peddler in Montreal, so,
Really?
really, yeah.
This is Bonjour Chai, the Over the Hill edition. I'm Avi Feingold in Montreal, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltzbovy in Toronto. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we are talking about talking. Opinions, advice, gossip. We speak to the folks behind the Forverts' wildly popular Bintel Brief column, and we discuss Jonah Hill's misdeeds and public callouts in general, plus, of course, nachas and more. Stay tuned. Phoebe, how's your week been?
Well, we found something to keep our children busy last weekend. We went for the first time ever to the big zoo in Toronto. So there's a small zoo in High Park, which is not that far from where we live, that has llamas, capybaras, which once famously escaped from that zoo, and like sheep. It has a lot of animals, but it's not like a big zoo with sort of more exotic animals. But we went to the big one. We finally did it.
I just heard a joke about zoos. So when they opened up the biblical zoo right in Jerusalem, so the first person going through to get a private tour was David Ben Gurion, of course. They want to show off what's so special, what's amazing. And they because it's the biblical zoo, they have an enclosure where there's a lion actually lying down with a lamb. And he's amazed at this. He goes, this is amazing. Clearly, like, it shows that we can do this. Like, we're able to have a messianic age. Israel is ushering this in. And he goes to the zookeeper, like, how did you manage to do this? And he goes, oh, we put in a new lamb every day.
Oh.
Well, speaking of lions and lambs, Jonah Hill, is he the lion or the lamb in this story?
Oh, boy. So, Jonah Hill.
Tell us about this story.
Well, I'm first going to give the Jewish context for Jonah Hill, which is surprisingly rich in layers. So Jonah Hill is not somebody I had given a tremendous amount of thought to until really working at the CJN and covering kind of Jewish zeitgeist stories lately. So Kanye West, apparently came around to Jews after seeing Jonah Hill in the movie 21 Jump Street. He posted about this. So I do not particularly identify with Jonah Hill. I'm going to just say it. Nor had I ever considered him a particular sort of Hollywood heartthrob to be to whom one might aspire to romance. However, he does apparently have a love life, which I have learned about recently, which is that, so he has a partner now and apparently a child with this partner. But before that, about a year or a couple of years ago, for about a year, he went out with a surfer named Sarah Brady, who posted to Instagram some screenshots of tweets that she claims were evidence of Jonah Hill's emotional abuse of her. And the tweets basically are about how Jonah Hill has boundaries, per Jonah Hill, in people he dates and in the women he dates. And basically he felt that his girlfriend at the time was violating those boundaries by posing in bathing suits, this girlfriend being a surfer. That is what she does.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So he doesn't like her surfing with men, posing in a bathing suit, or hanging around with female friends who he considers bad news from her wild recent past or something like this. Wild is now making me, of course, think of zoo animals. So I'm imagining that she's like cavorting with the zoo animals in some very literal sense. But no, it sounds like just human beings. But basically, all of this really broke the internet, as these things do, because there's this question. Is it, first, one possibility, wrong to share the private messages from an ex, which is what the New Yorker television critic Emily Nussbaum argued on Twitter, unless there's something in those texts that's really pertinent and that everybody needs to know about? Is that some sort of violation? Or conversely, is it emotional abuse to tell your partner that they can't wear a bathing suit and in a social media post or whatever this was. So yeah, a lot of people feel very strongly about this on both sides. I'm not sure that I feel very strongly about it on either side, but I do think that the issues it raises are interesting and that there's a Jewish angle, if not several of them. So one would be gossip, which I hear, Avi, there is some Jewish law about. Is that right?
Yes. The Jewish law is lashon hara, gossip, talebearing. Lashon hara literally means bad speech. Right? Bad speech that is evil, speech that is wrong. It has come to mean tale-bearing, saying things that are negative about people around you that are designed to slander them. There's many laws about it. In the early 20th century, there was a rabbi who wrote a book called the Chafetz Chaim, which was an in-depth discussion of all the laws, and it's become an incredibly popular book for people to read and to study all these laws to figure out what should I be able to say, what should I not be able to say. I think that there's something good in maintaining, the ability to speak of more elevated things and not to gossip about other people and to talebear to whether it's true, whether it's not. And there's, again, I'm not going to get into the detailed laws. As a kid, it's such a big deal when you grow up in the religious community. I don't know if you know this, right? That there's like a ton of songs about Lashon Hara, right? I can even play some of them for you for now. Here.
That's why Hashem gave us two lips to keep our mouth shut tight, and two lobes to close our ears from hearing things not right, like Lashon Hara.
Now join in when you get the hang of it.
What's the thing that always does us harm? What's the thing that sounds the alarm? What's the thing that makes us feel bad? What's the thing that makes Hashem sad?
Right, this is like for the 8-year-olds. This is like a big deal when you hear these songs and you're told don't speak lashon hara, don't speak back about people. What I find fascinating is that the reason why there are so many songs for kids, there's so much discussion around gossip, is that it's almost like a natural human instinct, right? If we are societal people,
yes.
Right, we are by nature wanting to talk about other people,
yes.
and what's going on. Are you supposed to say something negative about somebody else? No. If it has a specific reason and it is going to help the other individual in a meaningful way, then that's considered acceptable, right? If you talk to your friend and over coffee and you're telling them, I'm about to go and do this big investment with this guy, Bernard Madoff, right? I'm about to invest with him, and your friend decides not to tell you that he's like a Ponzi schemer because it's Lashon Hara. That's a problem. You should be told that.
So that
right?
was what I wanted to ask about specifically. So arguments have been made, and I see the point, and I kind of share the view to some extent, that basically the maligning of gossip is rooted to some extent in sexism, in the sense that the talking of women gets called gossip in a way that the talking of men does not. So that's one angle.
I have heard that even from a Jewish angle. I've heard Jewish scholars say that this was a way of saying that this is speech that is for certain people, and we men do business things and that's acceptable or whatever it might be.
So that's one angle, but then to sort of build on that is also this idea that it's more specifically a way that women have historically of protecting one another, like the whisper networks, like Me Too style, so that there's value, the argument is, in sharing not just what Jonah Hill texted in order to warn women off Jonah Hill specifically, because I don't think that this is going to be pertinent for that many women, how it is to date Jonah Hill specifically, but more like these are warning signs. And I think that was how Jonah Hill's ex-girlfriend excused, how she justified sharing these texts is, look, these are red flags. If a boyfriend is doing this, you should watch out. And that was her justification. And I think what's interesting about this is that I think today there isn't really this whole thing of just like celebrity gossip for the heck of it. And I think it always gets this kind of ethical justification tacked onto it. Sometimes I think that's understandable, sometimes less understandable, but that seems to be something that has shifted since like the early 2000s, I would say.
one of the classic examples that discusses this idea of lashon hara and when it's allowed is specifically with regards to a relationship, right? If you're going to marry somebody and you ask somebody about, anything you know about this person, and you're going to say to yourself, well, I'm not going to say anything about this person that's negative because it's lashon hara, right? That's a problem. You should speak up and say something about the person. But I think that that's a highly limited case of like where somebody is going to go and about to make a bad decision that it's a bad decision, the other person doesn't, then great. Right? In this situation, as you said, this person is not doing it to warn off other people off of Jonah Hill. Right. This person is, clearly doing it almost in a vendetta. It's almost like, I want to get back at Jonah. I want to show everybody what kind of a dick he is. Right. And that's a whole different set of issues
that's
of
not
like
what
whether
she's
you
claiming.
should say
She's
it.
claiming that she's doing it because these are warning signs in a relationship and she's helping other women. And some women have taken it
then
to
you
be
can
that message.
scrub the guy's name and you can say, listen, I've been in relationships where this type of stuff has happened.
Okay.
Right.
So the counter argument there is nobody cares. She's a nobody in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah,
As am I, as are we all. You know what I mean? She's not an A-list celebrity. He is. And she's doing this to get the word out. So what I have seen argued is that this is helpful to women generally because it blows it up into a big story, and that you would not be able to spread this message nearly as far if you're a semi-professional surfer talking about your unnamed ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, I'm really ambivalent about that one. I think that the potential for first of all, I'm not going to get into whether this is emotionally abusive or not. I just think he's a bad person. He seems like a dick. That's what it is. He just seems why would you want to date this person? Sure, but now I know this only because of this woman.
Well, I guess what I keep being sort of stuck on is in the specific text messages themselves, he's kind of saying, if you act in these ways, I won't date you. And what I'm trying to figure out is where that ranks as a threat. Okay, what if the answer is Jonah Hill won't date you? When I read this story, I identified with two people. I identified with the woman because, I'm also, a long since happily married person myself right now. But, I used to be a young woman dating and so forth. And yes, I encountered things of this nature. And so I identified with a woman, but I also thought, could you take a snippet of my life and say, wow, what a horrible person Phoebe is because she was in that terrible grumpy mood that one time and let's make that go viral. You know what I mean? I think there's a way that anybody at their lowest point could go viral for being an awful person. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I've ever done that, but I'm sure that there'd be a way to find anything in anybody. And I think the problem is you can kind of set a precedent if you say one bad moment in somebody's life, especially during a messy breakup, I think it's tricky and you don't want the bar to be too low for that. I think there's enough sort of unambiguous abuse out there that you don't really have to call this. I don't know, it's tricky because a lot of women did respond by saying yes, I've lived through this is what it looks like.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's leave it at that point and let's move on to larger advice giving. We just had a great opportunity to talk to the author and the historian of the Bintel Brief, which is a wildly popular column in the Forward. It comes out online. It has a very long history. We had a rollicking good time with this. Stay tuned for that interview right after we hear from our sponsor.
Are you in the market for a new watch or a special piece of jewelry? Are you looking for the perfect engagement ring to pop the question? Atelier Lou has all this and more. Eric and the team at Atelier Lou can craft a piece for you, or you can select from some of the exclusive designers that they offer. From a simple bangle to a statement necklace, Atelier Lou can make you or your loved ones sparkle. Located in the heart of Westmount in Montreal or online at atelierlou.com, visit Atelier Lou for your next watch or jewelry purchase. And when you do, make sure to use promo code BON18 for 10% off your next purchase. That's atelierlou.com.
Phoebe, you saw a column from the ethicist Kwame Anthony Appiah that caused the entire Jewish world to go at Twitter. And when you started talking about this, we started realizing that, like, hey, you know, there's a lot of history about advice columns, and they're perpetually in whatever magazine, whatever newspaper we're in. And long before the ethicist was Kwame Anthony Appiah, there was Randy Cohen, who was a Jewish ethicist. And before that, we had probably the most famous powerhouse twins of advice columny, Ann Landers and Dear Abby. Ann Landers, Esther Pauline Lederer Friedman. That's a name with some heft where you can get advice from it. So like we really, before all of that, right, was a little column called a Bintel Brief, dispensing wisdom in Yiddish from the Der Forverts, before it was even the Forward. And ever since then, the Forward has been dispensing a little bit of Yiddish wisdom to the masses. And we decided to go back to the source and find out about this and about columns, about advice, and how it all works. So with us today is Beth Harpaz, who is the author of the Bintel Brief currently, and Hannah Pollack, who is the archivist of the Jewish Forward, the Jewish Daily Forward, or Der Forverts, or however, all the other iterations of the Forward. Welcome to Bonjour Chai. It's great to have you both.
Shalom Aleichem. Thank you.
Aleichem Shalom. If we can start, what I love about advice columns is that the people who write them have zero training in being an advice columnist. And it's always, there's at least one column that talks about how you got to be an advice columnist and how they selected and all of that. So Beth, how did you get to the point where you're writing a Bintel Brief?
So I've always loved advice columns from the time I was a little girl, always read Dear Abby and Ann Landers, you know, and I subscribe to the Washington Post just so I can read their advice columns. I write 2 advice columns all the time. I've had several published by Social Cues, Phil Galanis in the New York Times. I even had one published by the fashion advice columnist.
Can you tell us what you
sure.
wrote to Philip Galanis about?
First I'll do the fashion advice one. I was looking for a job. I got laid off during the pandemic, and all the interviews were on Zoom. And I was like, what do you wear to a Zoom interview? That was the fashion advice columnist. She suggested I wear a black jacket. I didn't. Anyway, for the Social Cues, I said, what do you do when you're in the theater? This is a very New York question. And the person sitting next to you falls asleep and starts to snore. Like, am I supposed to, like, smack them? Like, poke them? Ignore it? Whatever. And
this would happen in Toronto, too, but people would just act different about it.
Well, what would they do in Toronto?
Nobody does anything.
Let
People
them
just
be.
people just stay still and don't say anything. It's super hard to get used to. So I'm a native New Yorker living in Toronto now, and I find it bizarre. It's a weird culture here. But anyway.
Yeah, well, as you could imagine, Social Cues said it's fine to just give them a little nudge and say, you know, you fell asleep, shh. Anyway, so I joined the Forward a little more than a year ago, and I think they were looking for some kind of new energy for Bintel Brief. And, you know, I'm kind of a yenta. I have 2 kids. I have a gigantic family. We're always in each other's business. I'm a New Yorker. I'm in the business of strangers. Like, a British guy was ordering a bagel in front of me one time in a bagel store. He asked for jam, and I just started yelling at him, like, you're in New York. Do not put jam on that bagel, okay? You got to get with the program, dude. So being that kind of personality, the boss said, like, oh, I think you'd be a good person to, like, help us out with Bintel. And the way I kind of manage the column. I'm the macher or the bubby. We have like a collective of writers. There's 5 of us. When letters come in, we kind of chew them over and somebody volunteers. I write about half of them, and then the other, we happen to be all women. The others take on, the other ones. I'm the oldest person in the group. So, you know, we have millennials and Gen Xers. So depending on the demographics or the life experience in the letter, somebody picks it who kind of has a feel for it. Some of the letters are very Jewish questions. You know, I don't want to circumcise my child. Will they still be Jewish? And in those cases, we seek a rabbi's help. Some of them are just like life problems. I'm retired and I don't know how to face the rest of my life. What do we do? So how do I make that Jewish? I give them 18 ways to embrace life, because 18 is life.
Sure, of course.
Are there people who seek advice, specific, like non-Jews even, who seek advice from Jews? And I'm thinking specifically of a Seinfeld where the opposite is true, where Estelle Costanza thinks that Jerry's girlfriend is Chinese and then learns that she's actually Jewish and says, I'm not taking advice from some girl from Long Island. And it's like one of the most memorable lines to be from Seinfeld. So I'm just wondering, are there people who think that, who go to Jews for advice?
In my tenure, I have not seen a letter from a non-Jewish person. Hannah, do you remember Rahel published in the last year a letter from the archives from a Christian woman, but it was like from the 40s or the 30s or something. She married a Jewish man, and there was an issue in the family, but it hasn't happened in my tenure.
It's not uncommon, though. That was a big question, right? Especially, the Bintel ran all the way into the 80s, and definitely the 60s and 70s were a lot of those kind of questions. What we call intermarriage or
well, that seems to have come up again. It seems like you had a dramatic question recently. Is that right? About a controversial one?
Oh, yeah. That is the best read in terms of page views and social media Bintel of all time. So a woman who had converted before marrying was divorcing her Jewish husband. And the husband said, "You're divorcing me. You can't be Jewish anymore." And she wrote us a letter and said, "I love being Jewish. I love my shul. I love my rabbi. What should I do?" And one of my colleagues answered the letter very compassionately and with great, sort of scholarship, saying that, rabbis believe that a convert is actually a Jew before they convert, that in their soul they're Jewish. And once you go through the rituals of conversion and you embrace Judaism, no one can take that away from you. It doesn't matter if you're married to a Jewish person or not. It was a beautiful, heartwarming,
but why was it controversial?
Letter.
Because to me, I read that letter and I thought, okay, the ex-husband's a not very nice person. What was the controversy?
We never know, what is in the mind of the letter writer? Why is she writing this, right? Mm-hmm. Our sense was that she wanted reassurance. She wanted to know that she was welcome in the Jewish community, that she wouldn't be ostracized in some way. And maybe she also wanted to smack the ex in the face in a public forum. I mean, we don't use names, of course. But what was most beautiful about this was the outpouring from readers on social media, on Twitter, on Reddit, on Facebook, in our inbox email, everywhere, on Instagram. Hundreds of comments from people all over the country saying, "Are you in Detroit? Come to shul with me. Are you in New Jersey? Are you in Los Angeles? I welcome you into my community. Of course you're Jewish." They were quoting The Big Lebowski. He divorced his Jewish wife and he's still Jewish and says all these funny things. I mean, it was they made up a song to the lyrics to the tune of West Side Story. Once you're a Jew all the way, from your first whatever to your last whatever. So it was like a beautiful thing. So I don't know that controversial is exactly the right way to put it, but it was certainly a beautiful embrace of Bintel and, everything that Bintel is about.
I love this, the way in which people come together, right? The advice readers, people who don't write into advice columns, are just as much part of the fabric of the advice column as the two people writing and responding to it. And that way it's very Talmudic, right? You have two people, so a person asking a question, a person answering a question, and then everybody else reading it for hundreds of years and doing something with it and creating commentary about it. My favorite thing about Bintel Brief is that it got so big, it got turned into a book, which got turned into a graphic novel, which got turned into a play in Yiddish, which starred in one of the most recent Montreal productions, my wife and my daughter. My wife was singing about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and this is how advice and people helping other people lives on forever and ever. What has happened? Why has Bintel Brief lasted so long and turned into an archive of all of these ideas, according in your mind?
Yeah, great question. Can I just call back a little bit to the drama of when I was coming up in Montreal in the late 70s, by the time I was a teenager? The play to go to for Jewish folks in Montreal was, of course, the Bintel Brief that Dora Wasserman had just interpreted and created. I think she was maybe the first person to actually create a play out of it. And that went forever at the Sadie Bronfman. Former
like I said, it was
Sadie
just
Bronfman.
on a few months ago. It's now the Siegel Center, but it is the Dora Wasserman Yiddish Theater, and it lives on. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, it started, I think the short answer is because it hit a chord in human nature that is with us forever. It's a love of story, right? We know that's human. And also the need to express your troubles, maybe a very Jewish kind of expression, but at the same time universal. So Ab Khan in 1903, he actually tried to start the Bintel because the Forward building was always open to the public 24/7. And people started to come like right off the boat, literally. There was also, you could have your mail sent to the forward. So you could come and, you just got off the boat and there would be letters waiting for you. Your relatives, family reunification was a huge part of.
That's not a service that you guys still offer, right? I can't send packages to the forward and pick them up next time in town.
Wow. Also because of digital. There's not so many packages going around anymore. But in my day, when I started at the forward in the late 90s, we still had that kind of function. All kinds of folks still kind of came. But of course that's kind of changed. And I think because of probably digital culture.
I would imagine security also. I mean, from when I was there, I remember
Yes.
like you have to show a badge and so forth to get in. So that changes.
Yeah, but that was, I think, probably after the towers fell too. So it was a little bit different.
Well after, yes.
What's fascinating about this is that like it starts because, I love the term greener, right? Right. Short for greenhorn, right? They're people who don't know how they're to function in a new society, right? So they're writing these letters to a Bintel Brief, right? As to be able to say like, hey, I don't know what to do in this situation. And the enduring legacy of all of these advice columns is that it reminds us that we're all greeners in some way or another. Right? We don't know how to act in the theater sometimes. We don't know how to dress in certain ways. We don't know all of these things. We think that we know a lot of stuff, and we realize that there's a lot of stuff that we don't know.
Can I push back on that a little? Because I think a lot of letters to advice columns are kind of more this like, I know I'm right. Can you tell me that that's true? And I was wondering sort of what the ratio is like. Are most of the letters that you get from people who already think they know the answer and you may have to push back against them, or are they people like genuinely seeking help?
Yeah. Are we allowed to use naughty words on this podcast?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay.
Yes.
So the AI.
Yes, AITA.
Am I the asshole here?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's a lot of letters to advice columns are like people looking for validation. Like, I did this and somebody told me I was wrong. What do you think? But you know what they want you to say. They want you to say, oh, of course you're right. We have a few like that. I think more of our letters are genuinely like from a seeker. I am at a crossroads and I don't know what to do. And I mean, some of the ones that get the most traction with readers certainly are like sisters who haven't spoken for 50 years. Like we had one lady who like her sons took all her money and she is about to be evicted.
That was
How do I get my money back?
Bleak. I read that one and it was.
Oh my God, I know. I know.
That was a sad one.
So I mean, a lot of times they're really like heartrending. We have a couple in queue that I haven't answered yet. There's one from this guy who says he has had this friend who's a woman for a long time, platonic, and they go out to lunch. And one day at lunch, she said to him, like, you interrupt me all the time. I don't want to talk to you anymore. And like, that was the end. Like she just cut off their relationship. And he's, he describes this whole thing. It's clear from the letter that he's overbearing and can't shut the hell up. And, it's a mansplaining thing.
Didn't
and it was definitely like
the Banshees of Inisherin, right? That's exactly the entire premise of it.
It was exactly. It was really like, am I the asshole? And like, yeah, dude, you are. We haven't answered that one yet, but I mean, we're going to have to find a way to tell him, like, your friend actually did you a favor by telling you to, shut up. Like, you probably have alienated, like, half the people because you can't shut up.
Not to interrupt, but one technical question. You do get actual letters because a lot of people suspect that advice columnists are just writing the letters themselves.
It's a great question. I will say when I came on, it seemed like, I don't think people on staff weren't writing the letters, but there was a lot more like, oh, can everybody just ask around and maybe someone who has a problem who can write a letter. And like, I worked for the Associated Press for 30 years. We don't do stuff like that. We're journalists. We are transparent. We are who we say we are. And so, at the moment we have enough letters coming in that we don't have to scrounge around. We can't even get through the ones that we have. But I have heard, I have no confirmation of this, that in the early days of Bintel, that Ab Kahan, the Forward founding editor, wrote some of the letters because he wanted to explain something to the audience about life in America, and he wanted to make that clear. And I did get a letter from someone who said her father used to write in fake letters just for like the ha-ha of it. I mean,
Okay, I love that.
I've heard Dan Savage talk about how his job, half the job is to suss out what the fake letters are and to leave those on the cutting room floor before even getting to it.
Yeah. I mean, I I have a pretty good antenna. I haven't read anything that seems like we're being.
But does it
it's a
even
put
matter?
on.
Because someone might actually have that problem, right?
Yeah,
if it's
it's
a plausible
possible.
enough.
Well, I think, can I just jump in on the
Yeah.
other side of that? This is true to the Bintel, that if if a letter came in and the issue was considered pressing enough or of interest enough, whether that be political or domestic, they would flip it into a column. They would just publish the letter as sort of an as told to issue, and the writer would sort of write about it. So there's definitely that kind of energy to it. And in the beginning, I know this too, that Ab Khan, he ran it for 3 years, and then he said, you know what, it was getting too much, and he passed it off. But there was a co-writer who kind of invented the Bintel with Khan in between 1903 to 1906 when they published the first one. They were experimenting, and that's Leon Gottlieb. He's like a lesser known, very acclaimed Yiddish novelist, writer, journalist, and political activist. And he was sort of Khan's assistant in inventing the Bintel Brief.
And you mentioned the books. There are 2 collections of Bintel letters which you can order online. The earlier, which is pre-war, so it's really the immigrant generation. Those letters are very much, how do I manage my life in America? There are things like, I work 16 hours a day in a factory and the boss is exploiting us. What do we do? There was a letter from people who'd been detained at Ellis Island for months, without any communication with the outside world. Somehow they got a letter to Bintel and the Forward intervened in their case. There were letters from women whose husbands had abandoned them, with children, and they were destitute. And so these were like real issues facing this, immigrant generation living in poverty, trying to figure out their way in a new land. The second book is much more like post-war, like we've moved into the middle class. There were things like, my wife died, I remarried, my children don't like my second wife, or I sent my daughter to the best schools, I thought I was doing the right thing, and now she wants to get a job instead of staying home to raise the children, or my son fell in love with a shiksa, what am I going to do? It wasn't like life and death, I'm locked in a factory.
This is actually kind of opening up the possibility to segue to that New York Times column. I would really like us to talk about that. So the ethicist did indeed receive a column from somebody whose mother, a grown-up, whose mother and stepfather have preemptively explained that they will disinherit any of their children who do not marry somebody who's Orthodox according to their preferred definitions thereof. So not a non-Jew at all, but it could be that they marry somebody Jewish, but not Jewish enough. But basically, the letter writer writes that their own spouse is Jewish enough, so this is not on their behalf, but that they have middle-aged siblings who the letter writer believes are literally remaining unmarried because of this. And that just, everything about this kind of blew my mind, because I just thought, are these people who are actually, if the letter writer thinks that these siblings are remaining unmarried because of this will, that implies that they have partners they're not marrying or something like that, because otherwise how would you even know that? I don't know, but there are so many angles, and I could go on. I want to hear what you all think about it, because it was a lot.
Well, I read The Ethicist obsessively, and by the way, I also read all 3,000 reader comments. It's ridiculous.
Of course. The New York Times comments, but especially to something like that.
This is the main export of New York City, is advice. Right?
Reader comments in the New York Times.
If the main, I had somebody once tell me that the main export of New Jersey is cousins. Right? Then the main export of Manhattan is advice.
Okay, that's good. So, but that said, the ethicist kind of drives me crazy, because I feel like he never lands. You know what I mean? He's like, well, this and well, that. And, and part of an advice column is trying to divine, what does the writer want from me?
What's the question behind the question?
Right? And so in this case, what do you think the writer wanted? Did she want the ethicist to say, your parents are jerks? Did she want the ethicist to, I don't know. My personal take, which is maybe not the ethical, what are the philosophical ramifications here, is if people are not marrying the person they love because they are holding out for money, what does that say about them? I could never live my life that way, and I wouldn't want to marry someone who lived their life that way. On the other hand, marriage is a patriarchal.
Depends on how big the inheritance is. A little theory that I did put into my Canadian Jewish News column on this was, do we even know that this is a lot of money? I have a theory that there's like 50 cents at stake here. And that this is just that the parents are being manipulative, the children being perhaps, a bit, I don't know if greedy is the word or whatever, a little too money focused, perhaps, if they are overly thinking about this. And that the whole thing is what it's going to turn out to be is there's like some change under the couch cushion. And congratulations, this one child married somebody who's Jewish enough. Here are your 50 cents. Congratulations.
Also,
enjoy.
if it really bothers her that much, once she gets the inheritance, she can redistribute it. There's no reason that she can't make it right if she thinks it's wrong.
Well, unless they're going to distribute it to somebody else, unless they have some other plan for that money.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, I thought the whole thing was a little bit bizarre. I mean, as far as is it right for the parents? I mean, I don't think it's right. On the other hand, you're allowed to do whatever you want with your money.
Well, I'm
you
not
could
sure.
give it all to charity. Lots of people do.
Yeah.
I had an aunt who had no children and 9 nieces and nephews, and she left all of her money to one of those 9, and none of the other said a word. That was her choice. Her money, her choice. Cool. What do you think, Hannah?
I guess a couple of things. One, I was like, the thing about the Bintel and what we were talking about earlier, why it struck such a chord among people and it lasted forever and stuff is exactly this. I am sure, although I cannot cite them, there are millions of these in the old forward. And though there are 2 books published in English, just bear in mind that there are probably hundreds of thousands of these letters in Yiddish that didn't get chosen or translated that are just as piquant and relevant and touching and stuff. So for the Yiddish readers out there, or for the people who want to learn Yiddish, this is a great enticement. Go, because then you can read all the Bintel in the back issues. And maybe a new book will come out and Beth will edit it. But that said, I just want to say, when I was thinking about this question and reading it in the ethicist, I actually jumped into the old Bintel just to see what I could pull up. And in 1954, okay, not completely analogous, but analogous in the sense that a woman wrote in, and it became a Bintel adjacent. It became a whole story. They gave her half a page. This is, mind you, on a broadsheet. So this is a ton of text. And then it leaked over. It had continued on page 2. And anyways, and the story, of course, goes all the way back to Eastern Europe, World War I. Woman gets married to someone she's not crazy about. Has in the course of World War I, she's smuggling for a living, and she meets she has a lover who she really cares for. Anyways, World War II comes around. They're all separated. She's still in her original marriage, and they've managed to immigrate. Long story short, old lover survives the war, and they reunite. They help bring them over, and of course they reignite the love affair. And here's the point. The husband dies, and in his will forbade her to remarry. And so they wrote in going what are we supposed to do? So, I think the bigger picture here is...
What did they do? What happened?
Well, according to, and this is the other thing about the Bintel, is people are writing in what they want to write in. So we don't always know how things turned out or what they did, right? And also, as you pointed out, the advice given is forward oriented. So in the very, very beginning, right, they're giving advice to people, helping them understand democracy, helping them understand why it's worth it for them to form a union, helping them understand why it's worth it for them not to break a strike, right? How to talk to their landlord, how to, all kinds of, how to work with political differences and religious differences within the same family, right? They're doing all of that kind of work. At this point in 54, it was just they decided they weren't. The advice given was you can go to a lawyer and you can take this to court. And there's the woman, the original wife, the widow now, who has the lover. Her decision apparently was that they didn't have to get married because they were in love, in fact, and they would live together. They didn't need marriage.
Oh, that's interesting. Even so long ago. I mean, I say my personal preference as a big fan of advice columns is always the ones where there is no option of call a lawyer, call a rabbi, call a therapist, and where it really is strictly an advice column situation. And yeah, I mean, the classic would be somebody has brought in a smelly lunch or whatever, you know what I mean? In the office and they microwave the fish and, whatever, that's the kind of classic. But things where there really would be no other expert but an advice columnist who who could possibly weigh in. And that's my personal biases there.
I think that's an interesting, for me, that's always very moving also about early journalism and also Jewish journalism. Like there is a role that is still really important that Beth serves as the editor of this this advice column. It sort of points to the role of Yiddish journalism, for sure, the Forward in particular, and just what we were talking about earlier about like people arriving and really like no clue, no money, right? In a completely new environment, be that Canada, where my grandparents came to, or, you know, America, like they were all of a sudden in, let's say, Western culture. And that's not where they came from, right? They're no longer under the czar. So, you know, how do we do this?
And I want to also just like, can I put in a plug for like your listeners to send us their questions? Bintel@forward.com, right?
I got a couple of things, one for each of you. So when you bring up these comments and the way that Phoebe framed it, right, that often advice columnists are, you know, often being asked questions and nobody else knows. What I think that people find fascinating about it is that they either agree wholeheartedly or they disagree vehemently, and that's part of the back and forth and the comments and all of this stuff and just the nature of reading them to begin with. Chana, have you found any like absolute howlers where you're like, how could this be the right advice given the long lens of history, where you've gone into the archives and said, like, this was not the right advice?
Oh, God. You know, I was going to say we got a letter like a couple of things. One, it's true that if a letter was so out there, let's say, to them, and somebody was writing in not for advice, but to like, I'll show you, I'm going to send a letter to the Bintel Brief, they're going to publish it, and that is going to ruin your day, right? They would keep it going. So, you know, there was, in the 1920s, there was something called the Montreal sisters, actually, which is why it caught my attention. And it was two sisters who, like, you know, one had brought the other one over as a young immigrant, and they settled them in their home, and they supported them and everything, and the people gave nothing back, like zero, like wouldn't even babysit the kid when the original sister who had arrived earlier was ill, like nothing doing. And they were just at wit's end, and finally they kicked the sister out. And now the two families weren't talking. So one sister wrote in first, and then the Forward just published it verbatim. Sometimes they would do that and not give advice. And then the other sister wrote in because she had seen it, and she was like, well, let me tell you my side, right? So it's not, you know, that just caught my attention as like, oh, my great. God, this is like Yiddish telenovela. It's just like,
sure.
But also heartbreaking.
In the book collections, I have read letters from people where there was an intermarriage, you know, into a Jewish person married a Christian person. And at least in the letters I read, the Forward was very against this. You know, it's like, this will never turn out well.
Okay, so that's literally what I did my doctoral dissertation on, was that in 19th century France, intermarriage in Jewish newspapers. It has been, although I'm just trying to think, I don't remember any advice columns, because I would have loved that and probably been all about that. But I remember a lot of discussion of intermarriage, fiction about intermarriage, but I don't know if the French were so into advice columns. Maybe it wasn't literary enough for the French.
I think basically you could say, like in one sentence, this is basically Forward advice. Everybody calm down. It's not as terrible as you're making it out to be. And let's apply a little bit of common sense to, you know, it's kind of like that, like a little bit like.
You would think that if it's, you know, Yiddish advice, it would be the opposite, right? You know, You're not taking this seriously enough. We need to ratchet this up 8 steps in order for you to realize the gravity of this situation.
Although I recently had a letter where I invoked one of my father's favorite sayings that, and Chana, correct my pronunciation if I'm wrong, Hakmir Nitkin Chinik, bang me no tea kettles, because this woman's husband was driving her crazy, interfering in everything she was doing. And she said, like, how do I get him to back off? You know, he's micromanaging my life. And I said, well, my father used to say when that was happening, bang me no tea kettles, Hakmir Nitkin Chinik. So that's the opposite, right? That is calm down, shut the hell up.
Have you had any questions, Beth, that have really stumped you? That you just like, I don't know how to answer this. We're putting this on the side because maybe we could answer them for you. You know? Like, I don't know.
Good question. Let me think about it for 1 second. My colleague actually is tackling a really tricky one today. I was like, I am not going near this one. A young woman wrote in to say that she wants to be more observant but she is enjoying her, and I quote, slutty behaviors. And how does she reconcile these two inclinations?
This sounds like
I could
this
tackle
sounds like
this.
Augustine, who says, "Oh Lord, please help me repent, just not today."
I mean, so can I try to tackle this one? So to me, this seems very similar to the circumcision question in that, and I don't mean this in any graphic way. I mean just in the sense of like religion comes with Judaism specifically with a lot of different obligations, and why if there's one thing that isn't something compatible with your values or life and what you consider important, then maybe do everything else, and I would say that like one thing you could do is, and this would be like channeling my many, many years of reading and listening to Dan Savage, but like if you're treating the people well, why, that's a type of ethical, and that maybe is the most this person is capable of doing, and they're not about to become, and also like Judaism doesn't have nuns, right? Like it's not a celibacy religion. Like, just I don't see why somebody couldn't be an observant Jew and be,
Slutty.
Libertine. Let's use the French. Libertine.
As the resident rabbi in this group, I would say that there are definitely people. There are people that would say that it might be problematic to be Jewish and slutty. First of all, I think you're absolutely right, Phoebe. And when people have come to me, not with exactly that question, but similar stuff, I say start with the things that you're capable of doing and that are comfortable with you and that make you feel good and that actually work
this person
well.
seems to be doing what makes her feel good, but that does not seem to be the problem.
To start with, I'm saying no in terms of increasing your observance. Yes, of course. And I think that there are ways in which you can be observant and slutty. I think that there are ways in which you can channel that.
You're hearing this now from a rabbi, not from
I think one can channel like one's sluttiness into an observant lifestyle in some way or another. I think it might be, with a long-term partner, potentially. Although Esther Perel will tell you that, that's exactly what you're supposed to do, is you're supposed to figure out how to be,
Remember that
slutty
obvious in French Canada, so it's all a little bit more...
Of course. So I don't think that there's a problem with this. I think that you don't become observant overnight. And the thing that I think is here, and that she's asking this question, and you always say, as I said before, the question behind the question here is that she clearly feels something wrong. Right? If she's bringing it up and she's saying, I want to be more observant, I also like this, but she's saying that I know at some fundamental level that this thing that I like is problematic with this new theology and this new philosophy that I'm adopting. And so I need a way to reconcile that, but I know that that reconciliation is not going to come in some sort of libertinism is Jewish and go do whatever you want.
We have put the official Canadian seal of approval on being an Orthodox slut.
Well, maybe you have.
In the sex positive sense. In the sex positive sense of the term slut, please.
What's that book called? The Ethical Slut, right? We can have the Frum Slut, right? That would be a good next book that we could write about. We're on a roll here. What's our next letter that we have to answer?
Oh, gee. Yeah, this, I didn't think this was such a complicated one, but my colleagues seem very, betwixt and between about it. A woman, what the heck was her name? I think she said her name was Rivka. Pretty sure it was Rivka. She said that whenever she, has to make a call, to a credit card company or something, they think she's a man. And they say, okay, sir. Hang on. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And it freaks her out, but she doesn't know what to say. I mean, I can't remember now whether she said she has kind of a deep voice or not. I mean, I didn't think this was such a big deal.
I mean, that does actually, that's a different advice column that I'm not going to digress about now, but that I've written about elsewhere. But no, I would say that seems like a case where this is somebody who will do well in this gender neutral future where people are not it's becoming, at least in Canada, a lot more gender neutral language should be used when possible, and don't say hello sir, hello ma'am when somebody comes into a store. I don't know how much that's happening in the States. Or people talk about their partner, most of the people saying this have a ostensibly heterosexual relationship. Partner is just the term used. I would say that this is on the one level, look to the future, it will get better. People are not going to keep doing this. However, I don't know how much that's the case in the States. I think you can probably correct if this is the case. If it's bothering you, you can correct the person. I think but I think I would say that like this would be my sort of blanket advice is that like you can't also control how the world perceives you. And if you have a voice that is what it is for whatever reason, you can't travel into somebody else's brain and make them hear something that they didn't hear. I would say just the most you can do is correct somebody, but you can't change what they hear.
Okay, if you have time, I've got one more really good one I just remembered. Okay, this woman wrote in, she has a crush on the rabbi, and she doesn't know what to do.
Okay, I got this one. First of all, is the rabbi single?
She says they're both single, they're both heterosexual. It's perfectly appropriate, except that he's the rabbi.
Has the rabbi been like putting in subliminal, like flirtatious messages into the sermon that she thinks is actually...
She did not say that.
Because that's where you start figuring out, right? Because rabbis, and we had a woman on a while ago to talk about this genre of romance novels in the Jewish community, in the Jewish romance novel. And there's one called Hot Rabbi that I read in an hour and a half because it was that compelling.
People who are not rabbis find it so compelling.
Well, apparently Jewish people do find Jewish romance novels, but
because I'm going to read this. There's this genre of romance novel opinion writers, who are
hot opinion writers,
yeah, and I'm just like, wow, amazing.
Rabbis need to be in relationships too.
And is it
a complicated thing? So I'll be honest. And
I've been in the pulpit.
I'm married to a pulpit person. The complicated thing is what happens when you make an advance to the rabbi, even in a nice, neutral, appropriate manner, and the rabbi says, "I'm not that interested in you." It makes things difficult for the rabbi congregant relationship. And if the relationship works, but then it doesn't, it also makes it difficult. That doesn't mean that one should not, potentially do something like that, but I think that you have to be really sure that your advances might be accepted, or that the relationship might work. No, because in this situation, like I said, or you have to be ready to potentially have a different relationship with the rabbi. And if he says no, then you say, "It's okay. I get it. I know that things might be awkward. Is there a colleague that I might ask a question to or that I might have an issue with, that we can have a certain amount of distance because of what I just said?" Because that does muddy the waters. But rabbis need to be slutty too.
But couldn't it be, okay, can I just make it maybe like a simpler answer, which is it's the same as the workplace romance question. If you're prepared to go to a different congregation, if things get messy, if you're nimble in that way, then you can ask the rabbi out prepared for a yes or no. I don't think you can ever ask somebody out prepared only for a yes. I think, and like you say, it can become messy even if it is a yes, that yes can become a no, or the congregant might not like the rabbi anymore. So I think as long as the congregant is prepared to go to a different congregation, if things get messy, like that would be, to me, what makes the difference in whether this is worth pursuing or not. If they are much more if they care so much about their belonging in this particular community, then yeah, I think that person is off limits.
That's good.
All right.
I'm going to steal all that.
Please. Beth, Chana, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Beth, keep it up. Keep adding to the archive for Chana. Chana, keep publicizing this. What I can't wait for is for the artificial intelligence that is fed the thousands and thousands and thousands of letters in Yiddish of the Bintel Brief that we can then start asking advice to, and we'll start dispensing advice based on the history of Bintel Brief, because I think that will be a chat GPT, right, that I will be glad to participate in and ask questions of. And now it's time on the show for our nachas of the week. Phoebe, what's your nachas this week?
My nachas is going to be a very Canadian Jewish one, which is that you can get Montreal bagels in Toronto, which I just hadn't quite figured out until fairly recently. And then there I was at Saint-Viateur, but also on Queen West.
Wow.
So that was, but I want to talk about how this bagel was served, because I think that's kind of interesting. So this is at a place called Cafe 23 on Queen West, kind of just east of Trinity Bellwoods Park. And they serve it, it's toasted with melted cheddar. So it's a Saint-Viateur sesame bagel toasted with melted cheddar. and they ask if you want hot sauce to dip it in. And at first I said no, and then I thought, wait, maybe. So I said yes, and then I dipped the bagel in the cheese bagel in hot sauce, and that was actually kind of good.
You started on a high, and you're just digging yourself deeper and deeper. There's so many things that I have to say about this right now. I'm sorry. First point, to a Montrealer, a cheese bagel is not a bagel with cheese on it. It is a very, very specific pastry that is not bagel-shaped. It is horseshoe-shaped, and it has cheese, sweet cheese stuffing inside of it. It is an amazing delicacy. Secondly, what you are describing is like a grilled
is it an
cheese
abomination.
It's a grilled cheese sandwich, basically.
Okay, some of the other
something.
bagels at this place had prosciutto on them, so I think the abominations we could save. But this one was kosher style. Okay, so what's your nachas, Avi?
Okay, so mine actually is very, very similar, but it comes in the exact opposite direction. Very Jewish Canadian, but it starts with something very not Jewish, or somebody very not Jewish, by the name a painter by the name of William Kurelek, who. When I was a kid, there was a book around the house always that he had co-written. He was a painter, so he was doing the illustrations. And Abraham Arnold wrote the essay that was part of this called Jewish Life in Canada. Abraham Arnold was the director of the Canadian Jewish Congress for Western Canada, I believe. He was a longtime Congress administrator and senior level executive. I think somebody write in and correct me if I'm wrong, or how wrong I am. But William Kurelek was a Ukrainian Orthodox turned Roman Catholic painter who painted these beautiful pastoral scenes of Jewish life. And he has a retrospective now at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection. Go check it out. And I know this because I just got a copy of the book that was sort of accompanying almost the book catalog for this exhibit. And it brought me back to my childhood because I remember this thin little volume with a black cover with these beautiful, very pastoral paintings of Jewish life in Canada. And it didn't occur to me that this guy wasn't Jewish because I was a kid and I hadn't seen these paintings in probably 35 years. And I just got this book given to me and I flipped through it and it just brought everything back to me. So I believe the exhibit is gone right now, but you can check it out. I believe there is a retrospective or a piece about it in the CJN magazine.
The summer issue. The summer issue has a whole bunch about that and some
so check that out.
Images of these artworks as well. So.
Great show. So much fun this time. Great fun
absolutely.
this week.
Nice chatting, Avi.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending July 15th, Shabbat Parashat Matot Ma'aseh. The show is produced and edited by Zach Kaufman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by Sokalt. We're a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We really would love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is always one of the best ways that we get new listeners. And please email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.